Hey there, I'm Carrie, and welcome back to my 4-part series on the fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. This is part 3. In this video, we're going to be breaking down some important bits of text and key scenes in the story. I've got timestamps in the video notes, so definitely scroll down, click around, and find exactly what it is you need. Without further ado, let's get back into the fall of the House of Usher. Now, at the very beginning of the story, the narrator tells us something strange about this family. It has never branched out. There is no extended family. There's no aunts or uncles or cousins running around. All of the Ushers are right here, and they have all lived in this house. It does seem, again, like there's this parasitic relationship between the family and the house. Like the family can't survive apart from the house. They can't make a life anywhere but this house. In the course of the story, we don't see Roderick or Madeline leave the house. He never goes outside, to take a walk or paint or anything. And even when they believe Madeline is dead, she doesn't leave the house. Usher says, I've got to keep her body here. It has to stay here in the main house. So for whatever reason, they can't go anywhere. The narrator makes the point of, the Usher name has only been handed down from father to son, from father to son. So there is only one representative of the Usher family per generation. But if there can only be one representative, one Usher born per generation, what happens when there are two? What happens when one pregnancy, one birth results into children? Is that why the house splits in two? If the Usher family is represented in two people, maybe that's why the house splits into two pieces. Of course, this could lead us to look at Madeline's death, or her supposed death, in a different light. Remember, Usher very strongly believes that his life, his fate, is wrapped up in the house. And if something happens to the house, something is going to happen to him. He thinks he's getting sick because the house is deteriorating. Now, if the house has split, because there are now two Ushers instead of just one, maybe he believes that he can keep the house together, he can keep the house in one piece if he gets rid of Madeline. I think there are some suggestions here that he did something to her, that this is not an illness, that this is foul play. Remember, after Madeline dies, or supposedly dies, the narrator thinks that something even more than grief is pushing down on Usher. So maybe that is guilt. Maybe he did something to his sister. There's also some suggestions of incest within the Usher family. Roderick Usher's features are very, very exaggerated. They're very distinct. That's something that can happen if physical traits are concentrated over several generations. Also, Usher refers to his illness as a family evil. When people marry close relatives, the children born of those relationships have a much higher risk of genetic disorders. So there could be something to Usher's feeling that something genetic, something is coming from his blood. Also, look at some of the details in the story. The family's interests are very extreme, and they're sort of hyper-focused. Their world is very small. Not only have they never left this one house, they're concentrated in this one single place. The narrator notes that, the family is noted for having an interest in art and in music, but they're not interested in the big picture of it all. They're interested in he says, the intricacies of musical science. These tiny little details is where the family puts all of their energy. And you see that with Usher as well. He is a very good painter, and he's very good at improvising on his guitar, but these are the only things that he's good at. He has hyper-focused all of his energy into these things. So speaking of Roderick's painting, let's talk about that painting really quick. The painting of the long corridor, the tunnel or vault that the narrator looks at, and the narrator is very disturbed by it. This can be read as sexual imagery. That image of the long tunnel can be interpreted as an image of the female's sex organs. When the narrator describes the painting, he says it has a ghastly and inappropriate splendor. So even though it's eye-catching and it's very vivid, there's something repulsive about it. There's something very off. Let's talk about this actual vault where Madeline is buried. Let's talk about her death. So Roderick's painting, like I said, it can be read as sexual imagery, but it can also just be a vault. It can just be a tunnel, an underground tunnel. The painting does seem to reference directly this tunnel where they store Madeline's body. That kind of suggests to me that this could be premeditated. He is focusing a little bit too much on what he's gonna do after she dies. Now, Usher tells the narrator that he wants to keep Madeline's body in the main house for 2 weeks. He says it's because he's nervous of body snatchers. You know, she is known to have had this very mysterious illness. All of the physicians were very puzzled by it, and he's nervous that someone will steal her body and sell it to a medical school. That was a realistic fear in Poe's era. However, I'm not sure that the narrator believes him. When Usher tells him like he wants to keep her body in the house for 2 weeks, look what it says. His fear of the body snatchers, fear of grave robbers had led him to his resolution. So he told me. The "so he told me" is in parentheses. To me, that signals suspicion on the part of the narrator. I don't know that he believes that Usher is only afraid of grave robbers. He could just be trying to avoid a doctor looking at her. He wants to be sure a physician or a magistrate does not look at this body and start wondering if there has been something besides Madeline's illness that has caused her death. Another thing that to me suggests foul play is Usher's reaction when he realizes that Madeline is still alive. When he hears her coming up the stairs, he says, "Whither shall I fly? Where am I gonna go? Where do I run to escape from her?" When he realizes that she is still alive, there is no shock. There's no relief. There's no joy about it. It's terrors. You know, she's coming for me. She's going to take revenge on me. The sound that Usher has been hearing, he says it's the heavy and horrible beating of her heart. This is really similar to wording from another one of Poe's short stories, The Telltale Heart. And in that one, it is about a murder. It's very plainly stated. The speaker in that story plans and executes a murder, and he's very, very anxious about hearing the heartbeat of his victim. So the similarities between those two stories makes me think that this is not a natural death. This was attempted murder. So throughout this short story, starting at the very beginning, there are a lot of references to other literary and artistic works. So let's take a look at a few of them. The story begins, it's in French, and my French is, I don't read French, so I'm not going to try to. There is a quote from the French poet Pierre-Jean de Béranger. "The heart is a lute newly strung, one touch and it resounds." Now, a lute is a stringed instrument. So that's a reference to Usher right there, who has that love of stringed instruments. Says one touch and it resounds. That could be a reference to Usher's sensitivity. He's very, very reactive. Also, a lute historically would be used like in a royal court, you know, by a court musician, someone that is entertaining the king and queen and the nobles. The songs that these court musicians would sing were very frequently stories that were set to music. So it's interesting to throw that in at the beginning of the story. It's kind of an introduction, you know, sit down, I'm going to tell you a story. There's also a reference to a song that they call the Last Waltz of von Weber. He was a German composer, and the song that they're referring to was actually not written by von Weber. It was written by someone else, but it's become very commonly attributed to this one composer. So Usher likes to improv with this song on his guitar. The thing is, the narrator calls his playing, it says it's a perversion and amplification of the song. If you pervert something, that means you twist it out of shape. You use it for something that it isn't meant for. And amplification just means to make it louder, to exaggerate something. So Usher is taking this song, this waltz, and he is turning it into something that it is not meant to be. He's warping it. Someone named Fuseli is also mentioned. Now, he was a painter, and if you Google his work, you'll see that it's very, very dramatic. There's lots of shadow and bright light, has lots of supernatural subject matter. There's lots of demons and spirits that are pictured in it. There's also a whole paragraph that is dedicated to the books that Usher and the narrator are reading. Now, I am not well versed enough in the classics to explain why each of these is there. So if you are, definitely drop that in the comments because I would like to hear about it. However, these books as a group, there's lots of supernatural elements. There's magic, there's mythological references, there's lots of questioning of the establishment, of religion, of marriage, and of societal roles. Let's also talk about this haunted palace song that Usher apparently just improvs and throws together. So the story that the haunted palace tells is Gothic, just like our larger story about the House of Usher. So remember, Gothic, we've got castles, we've got kings and queens, and there's parallels, direct parallels between Usher and his situation and the story that he is telling in his song. He's got a palace that's in a remote location. It was once very grandiose, but now it's fallen into disrepair. He mentions that this palace also has some red tinged windows that are present in Usher's bedroom. And this palace is ruled by a king whose reason and logic have been overcome by fear and sorrow, which is exactly what is happening to Usher. The really creepy part of this song that Usher throws together is the last line. It's talking about the people in this palace laugh but smile no more. I think that is a description of screaming. Someone whose mouth is open and they're making an uncontrollable sound, but they aren't smiling. You would not assume they're laughing, they're crying, they're screaming. So this could foreshadow how the Usher siblings are going to die. They won't be laughing, they'll be screaming. Also, towards the end, when Usher comes to the narrator's bedroom during the storm, the narrator says there was a species of mad hilarity in Usher's eyes. So there's a reference back to the haunted palace again, the laughing without smiling. So Usher is panicking, he's hysterical, but there is hilarity in his eyes. Another thing that you might notice in here is that the words phantasm, fantasia, phantasmagoric are used multiple times throughout the story. The word phantasm and all of its associated words means something that is associated with the imagination. This tells me that Usher has become stuck in his head. He is stuck in his imagination and he is being controlled just by his fantasies and his fears. All right, now let's head to the end of the story when the storm, the tempest, has rolled up on the house. Now, the narrator is not sleeping at this point. He has been kind of infected with the nervous state of Usher, the nervous state of the house. He says, "There sat upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm." So he's very anxious. He's very frightened about something that he can't quite identify. An incubus is a demon. It's like, again, a parasitic presence. It is a demon that preys on humans. Just like Usher, he's begun to pace around the room. So he's walking around aimlessly because of this severe anxiety. And he even begins to think that he's hearing strange noises within the house. Okay, so let's talk about this book that the narrator reads to Usher, the Mad Trist, and the author is Sir Lancelot Canning. Now, the other books that were mentioned in this story are real books. They're real works of art. As far as I can tell, the Mad Trist is not. There is nothing out there called the Mad Trist. There's not an author named Lancelot Canning. However, the story, from what I'm getting, is a very typical like medieval epic adventure romance type story. In the story, our hero, this knight named Ethelred, is going after a hermit. He breaks down the door to get to the hermit. He encounters a dragon, which he defeats. He reaches for a shield, which falls off the wall, and now belongs to him. And interspersed with this story is the strange noises that are going on in the house. So we have a story within a story here. Now, what I want to do, stay with me, I want to take the characters from the House of Usher and we're going to put them in this story, the Mad Trist. Madeline is going to represent Ethelred, the hero, the knight. Usher is going to be the hermit, this recluse that the hero is after, and the house itself is going to be the dragon, all right? So let's go through this scene again. So it is the climax of the Mad Trist. It is the climax of the story, and a storm has rolled up. Just like in the larger story where it is the climax, the turning point of the story, and a storm has rolled up. The hero Ethelred is after this hermit, this reclusive person, and he breaks down a door to get to him. And somewhere in the house in the larger story, they hear the sound of splitting wood. That's Madeline breaking through her coffin lid. Next, Ethelred encounters a dragon of a scaly and prodigious demeanor and a fiery tongue. So I want you to think of the house as the dragon. It's made up of these thousands of stones that are covered with fungi. So that is the dragon's scales. The fiery tongue could be that copper tunnel where Madeline has been vaulted in, where she has been held. So you could see this as her breaking out of the jaws of the dragon. She is out of the dragon's mouth now. And the screaming, shrieking of the dragon is mirrored by her lifting that iron door. She is shoving her way through, and it makes that grating noise within the house. What happens next? Ethelred reaches for this metal shield, and it falls and hits the floor and makes a loud clanging noise. So a shield is a defensive device. If you drop a shield, if a shield falls, that is a symbol of defeat. It's a symbol of surrender. So we've got Madeline coming out triumphant here. She has busted out of her coffin. She has made her way through this iron door, and now she is making it out of this copper tunnel. The sound of the shield falling in the Mad Trist is mirrored by the sound of Madeline walking through this copper tunnel, this clanging sound. So Madeline makes it up the stairs, and the door swings open. The door to the bedroom swings open. The narrator describes this as the ponderous and ebony jaws swinging open. So the house again is the dragon, and the bedroom door is the jaws of the dragon opening up. Now, in the Mad Trist, Ethelred busted through this door and encountered this dragon because he is seeking this hermit, this recluse, and Usher is the hermit. So Madeline has busted out of her coffin. She has beaten the house. She's gotten through the house because she is after her brother. It's exactly what Usher is afraid of. Madeline has come for him. She's coming for revenge. The text says she fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother. Now you could read this as a literal collapse, like she fell down on the floor because she is very weak. But also, if you fall upon someone, that means you attack them. Like you were lying in wait, you fell on them, you ambushed them, you attacked them. So she attacks her brother, she comes for him, and she kills him in her final moments. Now, when the house breaks apart, the two halves of the house split. I think you could see that as it breaking the twins' bond. Or it could just be, again, an echo of this parasitic relationship they have. You know, the siblings die, and so the house collapses. Or the house is collapsing, and so the siblings die. We don't really know what comes first there. And in the end, the house disappears down into the lake. So it is swallowed by the earth. It's a symbolic burial, both of the siblings and the house. All right, so last thing, let's look at links to some of Edgar Allan Poe's other stories. If you don't want spoiler alerts, close your ears now. The poem, The Bells, has a lot to do with the different metals, you know, copper, brass, iron, gold, and silver. These all appear in the bells, and they're also symbolic in the fall of the House of Usher. And as I mentioned, autumn is associated with death in both of those. So if you are interested in the artistic details, maybe check out the bells. Then there's the Telltale Heart. In both of these, the main character talks about having an over-acuteness of the senses. You know, they can hear things that other people cannot hear. And they are both very, very anxious people, very frightened people. There's also the Masque of the Red Death. And this one to me has the most links to it. There are similarities in the architecture. They both take place in these sort of old palace, fortress, mansion type dwellings. They have similar details, you know, pointed Gothic windows, the red windows and the dark furnishings, like the dark drapes and flooring, that figures much more prominently in the Masque of the Red Death. It's a very central plot point. There's also the house as a function of the person's mind. You know, the house is an extension of the person that lives there. And the Haunted Palace song that Usher comes up with very closely parallels the plot of the Masque of the Red Death. So if that was an interesting point for you, you might check out this other short story. Now, also the fall of the House of Usher has just been overall super influential for the horror genre in general. Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Jekyll and Hyde and Treasure Island, has a short story called Olaya. If you're a fan of the fall of the House of Usher, you should definitely read that one, because we again have this mysterious old aristocratic family that live in this isolated house and this weird sibling bond going on. And of course, the idea of a sentient house, of a living house, is very prominent in horror films now. Just a few years ago, Guillermo del Toro created Crimson Peak, which is a really interesting gothic film, and it takes a lot from The Fall of the House of Usher. There are some very strong parallels there. We've got the possibly sentient house. We've got this very strange sibling bond that's kind of controlling it. Yeah, so if you are interested in the artistic elements and the story elements, Crimson Peak might be an interesting film to look at. All right, that's all for this video. If you are ready, go ahead and meet me in part 4, which is going to be an in-depth look at the Haunted Palace, which is the poetry section of this story. I hope you found something in here that was helpful to you. If you did, please like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when the next story or poem becomes available. If you had a different story in mind or a particular author that you're interested in, definitely drop that in the comments and I will see what I can do. Best of luck to you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.